Hey guys, it's Chase. I work at the Panhandle-Plains Historical Museum in the Education Department, and I'm going to show you some of the stuff that we have in our cowboy trunk. The first thing I'm going to show you is a brand. So the cowboys used to use this to brand their cattle and any of their animals that they needed. They would heat it up in a fire and then stick it onto the animal to where it would burn the fur off and burn the skin, and it would create a small little scar on the animals that they could see. And continuing to get to the animals, this is a horseshoe. So these would be tacked onto the hooves of a horse, and they would be used to protect the horse's feet whenever they were going on long cattle drives or going around the countryside. The thing behind me is a chuck wagon, and they always had tin cups on there. The tin cups were used for their drinking, so they would carry their water whenever they had time to camp. The chuck wagons would usually ride ahead of the cattle drive and would find a good place to stop, and then they would make the food. That way the cowboys and the ranchers always had something to eat. And they always had their tin cups with them and a good supply of food and water. Cowboys were usually pretty religious, so this is a daily devotional. It has daily thoughts and prayers in it. So it's a book of Psalms, and it was, cowboys would lay down and before they went to bed read a devotional. They're dated, so each day the cowboy could go to the next one on the list. So whenever they were on their cattle drives, they could read them, and it would go one from March 26th if they were stopped on March 26th. So cowboys were pretty religious. They had to believe whenever they were out on their cattle drives, being out there in the wilderness by yourselves with just a group of guys. Another essential part of the cowboys were their clothing, and so they always had their gloves. They were riding horses all day, so they were holding onto the reins. They also had to hold on to their ropes, so if one of the cows got out of the herd, they would have to use their rope to go get them. So these were always there to protect their gloves, even whenever they were on a ranch and putting up barbed wire or building a cabin, whatever they had to do. Cowboys always had their gloves with them. Also, cowboys always carried their canteens. So their canteens were always filled with water, so whenever they were out by themselves without the chuck wagon, they always had something to drink whenever they were going on a cattle drive. Usually there was about 5 to 10 guys that were on a cattle drive, and they would all stay around the cattle, herd them. It depended on how big the herd of cattle was, on how many people were out there with them. Usually there was one main boss, and the boss is the only one that carried a gun. So everybody that says all cowboys carried guns, that's actually a myth. Only one cowboy during the time of a cattle drive would carry a gun, and it was mainly used to ward off animals, not even for protection. Continuing with the clothes that they wore, here's some of their pajamas. They're long johns, so cowboys would usually wear them under their clothing if they wanted to keep warm. They're cotton, they look like pajamas. It's a full bodysuit, so they go all the way down to your wrists, and then they're connected and go all the way down to the bottom of your legs. They're pretty warm, and they kept the cowboys cozy whenever they were on their cattle drives, and they kept them warm to where they didn't freeze whenever they were out in the middle of winter. Cowboys also wore chaps, so their chaps go around their legs, and they would protect them from the brush whenever they were walking around. Usually they have, or some of them have, strings on the end of them, and whenever they were walking, that would catch all the thorns and stickers that would get caught in their legs. And so they were pretty essential in the protection of a cowboy, just like the gloves. Cowboys also always wore their hat. Their hat was used to protect them from the sun. So you can think in the Texas Panhandle, there's not many trees, especially where we are in the plains. There's minimal trees, and whenever there are trees, they've been brought here later. So being out in the sun with nothing, you're just standing on the back of your horse, it's pretty good to have a hat, keeps you cool. So cowboys really needed their hats. It was always something whenever they had to, if they got too hot, they had to stop, and when you stop, you lose your money, and they would never want to stop, and you don't want to be the reason they would have to stop. So here's some cowboy boots. They're regular cowboy boots. You know, cowboys always had their boots on. They're leather, so they would protect against punctures, and the bottom of them are usually really hard. Whenever you have your cowboy boots, you would also wear spurs. This is a more elegant spur, and it's a Spanish spur, but they would go on the back of your boot like this, and they were used for whenever you're riding your horse. Whenever you're riding your horse, you could spur them in the side, and it would kind of get them to giddy up and go. And this is just a basic spur. You can tell they're this one's smaller than this one, and it's not as elegant. It's just made out of what looks to be like a steel and this bronze or brass. But the Spanish spurs are more elegant because they were more decorative. And the last thing I'm going to show y'all today is the list of barbed wire. So the barbed wire is used on ranches. It keeps the cattle in and other animals out. They have these little spikes on them that are called the barbs, and basically whenever you try to go through it, these barbs get caught in you and will cut your skin and put holes in you, and it's not very pleasant. You wouldn't want to get stuck in a barbed wire fence. So that's what we have in our cowboy trunk at the Panhandle-Plains Historical Museum. Come by whenever we're open, and it was good to see y'all.